Well, it's a nice big showing after coming back from spring break. Thank you all for coming. Brief introduction about the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society for Law and Public Policy Studies is a group of conservatives and libertarians interested in the current state of the legal order. It is founded on the principles that the state exists to preserve freedom, that the separation of governmental powers is essential to our Constitution, and that it is emphatically the province and duty of the judiciary to say what the law is, not what it should be. The Society seeks both to promote an awareness of these principles and to further their application through its activities. I'll give a brief rundown about our upcoming events. Um, Thank you to those of you who came this past Monday to hear Logan Byrne speak about the history of presidential power. This Sunday, if you register, we're going to have our first gun range event, and Representative Bob Barr is going to speak about his topic is the left still refuses to recognize the right to keep and bear arms. And so to continue with this Second Amendment dialogue, we're going to be talking today about the First Amendment, Second Amendment, and 3D printed guns. Additionally, next Wednesday, the 22nd, we're going to be having a debate on originalism versus living constitutionalism titled Our Constitution, Dead or Alive, featuring Professors Elon Werman and Eric Segal.
It's dead.
Dead. You heard it. There you go. And April 10th, we'll be having a debate about hate speech featuring Professor Eugene Volokh and the opposing speaker to be announced. We may have another event here and there. We're going to be having our banquet April 1st. You'll hear more about it soon. And that is on a topic of religious liberty. We're going to have Professor Whitty come and speak, and Professor Cole also may be speaking. And so that'll be university-wide. We hope to invite everybody. And elections are coming up. If you saw that email, you know what to do. If you didn't see the email, please let me know. Without further ado, I'll introduce Professor Josh Blackman, a national thought leader on constitutional law in the United States Supreme Court. Josh's work was quoted during 2 presidential impeachment trials. He has testified before Congress and advises federal and state lawmakers. Josh regularly appears on TV, including NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, and the BBC. Josh is also a frequent guest on NPR and other syndicated radio programs. He has published commentaries in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and leading national publications. Since 2012, Josh has served as a professor at the South Texas College of Law, Houston. He holds the Centennial Chair of Constitutional Law. Josh is also an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Josh has authored 3 books. His latest, An Introduction to Constitutional Law, is a top 5 bestseller on Amazon. Josh has written more than 5 dozen law review articles that have been cited nearly 1,000 times. Josh was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 under 30 in law and policy. Josh is the president of the Harlan Institute and founded Fantasy SCOTUS, the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league. Now, that sounds interesting.
Should all play.
He blogs at the Volokh Conspiracy. We all know one of the Volokhs, and we're gonna have another Volokh coming. And tweets at Josh M. Blackman. So
It's like the State of the Union. One Volokh person has to be off campus in case there's like a disaster. If you all be distributed.
yeah, well, he wants
Designated survivor.
he wants to participate in the debate, but it may be too much Volokh for us. We'll see. But and I met Professor Blackman. He spoke to TFAS, where I was a fellow this past summer, speaking about the emergency docket, and we're happy to have him here today.
Not the shadow docket.
Not the shadow docket.
Good
Thank you,
seeing
sir.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you. A pleasure to be here. My first time at Emory. I've been to every other law school in Atlanta except for this one. So you guys finally made the right invitation. You were in for a treat today. You get not 1 constitutional right, but 2 constitutional rights. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and 3D printed guns. To start off, has anyone ever used a 3D printer before? Okay, a couple people. What'd you make?
Just some little trinkets.
Trinkets? Yeah, what'd you make?
Our research lab.
What was it?
Separator for a chemical process.
Okay, that's kind of cool. Hey, come on in.
I made model rocket parts also.
Rocket parts, that's kind of cool. So 3D printing is a fairly newish technology that lets you design an object on a screen in 3 dimensions. It could be trinkets, rocket parts, it could be a car, you can even 3D print a house. And you can then use a very specific printing process to generate an actual real life object. So a brief tutorial, this will take only a moment, you don't have to know much math. If I want to make a cylinder with a height of 20 inches and a radius of 5, I simply use this word, cylinder, height of 20, radius of 5, and boom, it spits this out, right? You can use very simple code, very simple language to generate shapes and sizes of all objects. Now, this is fairly straightforward. They get more complicated. You can make trinkets, you can make sunglasses, you can make various tchotchkes. You can make things of different translucencies, things that are clear and see-through. You can make a race car. Is actually a 3D printer looks like. Okay, you can make parts of the human anatomy. This is actually a model of a human brain that people have. Okay. Now the process of making or the process of using a 3D printer resembles making a candle. Have you all made a candle before? Right? Okay, how do you make a candle? You take the wick, you dip it in, you pull it out, you dip it in, pull it out, right? Every time you dip it, it gets a little bit thicker around the base. 3D printing works in the same exact fashion. But instead of dipping wax, you are spraying a very fine layer of plastic, just a few millimeters in thickness. And you spray this nozzle, one layer on top of another on top of another. The bottom sort of moves around and the top moves around to make sure you're spraying at the right point. And depending how much plastic you spray, you make objects of different shapes and sizes. Here's another view. You can have the nozzle there. You have this little heated bed to keep it warm. And it's a very straightforward concept. Got it? Okay, good. But I want to show you now a demonstration of actually 3D printing an object. I will not tell you what the object is. You will guess what the object is. All right? So I'll count off. This is the first shot. You see there's kind of like this honeycomb, this hexagonal a grid, which is a very strong way of building structures we reinforce. This is number one. Number two, so it gets a little bit taller. Number three. Number four. Anyone see it yet? No? Okay, try it again. Number five. Anyone yet see what it is? What? Okay. Six. Anyone? Seven. No. Eight. It's not yet. Close. Say it. Winner gives it for Chick-fil-A, right? That's it. It is Yoda from Star Wars, not the baby one, but the actual adult one. There it is. Now you all see it? All right. So it's a very cool technology where you put one layer on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, until you top off the head, right? And look, I'm not artistic. Maybe you are. I couldn't sculpt this, right? I couldn't make this out of clay or stone or any other material. But I could use a 3D printer and I can make this technology work to design various things. Now, you didn't all invite me to come here and talk about Yoda. That's not why I'm here. You invited me to talk about something a lot more fun, which is 3D printed guns. And this is a topic that I have some experience in. For the last 9 years or so, I've actually been litigating the issue of 3D printed guns. Long before that, I wrote an article on this in 2014 or so. And this generated some interest. Now let's take a step back. This is the Liberator, right? The Liberator is the first gun that's functional created entirely with a 3D printer. This was built around 2012 or 2013 by a guy named Cody Wilson. At the time, he was a law student at UT who made international headlines by making a 3D printed gun. He also made this, which some of you may know what this is. This is a 3D printed receiver for an AR-15, fully functional. Does not need to go through any background check process. He also made magazines for various weapons. But this is what really put him on the map, the Liberator. Now, Josh, what the heck is this? These are the parts of a gun. And it was actually the genius what Cody did to sort of assemble these in a way They can be made entirely with a 3D printer. The only metal is a bullet, buy any store, and a firing pin. This is actually what strikes the, basically the way a bullet works. You strike the back, it goes boom, and the projectile goes forward, right? The only metal is the bullet and the firing pin. This blue thing is the handle. This big white thing is the receiver or the frame. This little circle here, that is the barrel. That's what the bullet actually flies out of. And the little squiggly thingies, these are the springs that you sort of pull back to create the tension, right? But all these parts can be 3D printed. This is what the gun looks like once fully assembled. It's not a very attractive gun. It's not a very good gun. In fact, it's not a very safe gun. Um, if you'll notice, there's a rope along the floor. Now, you might guess, Josh, why is there a rope there? Well, in the early tests, what they would do is they would tie the trigger to a rope, and they would stand very far away when they pull it. Why? Well, they don't want to blow up in their hand and lose their fingers, right? Plastic is a terrible way to make a gun. Awful. Why? What happens when plastic gets hot? It melts. When plastic gets cold, it cracks, right? It's a very bad way. The property of a gun is it gets hot and it gets cold. It goes hot, gets cold every time you fire it, right? This is a bad way of making a gun. In fact, it takes up to 40 hours to actually print it. It usually requires very expensive equipment. It fires one bullet at a time and not very accurately. There's no what's called rifling. There's no groove on the barrel to actually make the gun aim. You can't even aim the darn thing, right? This is a terrible way of making a gun. But Cody made global headlines in 2012 and 2013. Why? People panicked. They said, oh my God, there'll be armies equipped with 3D printed guns that can evade every metal detector, that they can evade every single security check at the airport and just smuggle in guns everywhere else, right? So the question becomes, is this a problem, right? Law, right? Is this a legal problem? When most people think of 3D printed guns, this is what they have in mind. No, that's not how it works, right? You don't just press a button and a fully functional gun pops out. To the contrary, making a gun is actually pretty easy. Has anyone ever made a zip gun in this room? Oh, you guys are too well behaved. At the schools they make at John Marshall, they're making zip guns, right? At Georgia State, when I go there, they're making zip guns, right? At UGA, they're making zip guns, but not here, I guess. A zip gun is a homemade gun. You can make with parts you can buy at any hardware store. All right. So what's this? This is a gun made from a soldering iron and a garden hose nozzle. Right, you basically put a garden hose nozzle on a soldering iron and you've made a gun. And I'll tell you, this gun's a heck of a lot better than one made of plastic because it actually won't blow up in your hands because it's made out of metal and it's designed to withstand substantial heat and cold. Right? I found these blueprints online. Don't try this at home. These geniuses took a keychain flashlight and hollowed it out and made it into a weapon. It's a gun, right? A fully functional gun on a keychain with a little bullet round. All right, I'll show you another demonstration. Please do not try this at home. These guys are idiots. So these guys decide to make a rifle out of a piece of rubber tubing and a metal pipe. That's all you need. The rubber tubing will be the barrel, and there's a metal pipe. That's it. And the recording's on a flip phone, so you know this is serious. This is a professional experiment, right? Here's what they're going to do. They're going to take the back of this metal pipe and use the firing pin. See, there's like a little dimple here, it kind of protrudes. And what are they going to do? They're going to load the red shotgun shell into the rubber tube. And they're going to jam the metal pipe into the back of the tube. Now, you've both taken torch, right? If you can, you're wincing. What's wrong with this picture? What's the problem here? Yeah.
Probably will end up breaking the tube and coming out.
That's the least of the worries. Where are they firing this? Indoors. So first off, don't ever fire a gun unless you really have to. Maybe Mr. Barrow took it one, you need to fire the gun, right? But more importantly, Don't fire it inside a room. Now, where are they firing into? It's a cardboard box. And then what's behind the cardboard box? Can you see it? Yeah, this picture makes it a little more clear. So there's an outlet right over there with a bunch of extension cords running next to those pipes. So again, these guys, not the brightest in the shed, right? And in fact, this is extremely dangerous. But I'm showing this video to illustrate how easy it is, right? How simple it is to actually make a gun with parts you can find around the house. That's a lot more lethal than a Liberator. All right, so you ready? They're going to jam it in. Ready? See? He's got one hand here on the metal pipe, one hand here on the rubber tube, his hand literally covering the muzzle of the gun, right? You will have 10 fingers in a few minutes, I promise, right? Ready? 1, 2, boom. Gun. Fully functional gun. Maybe $5 in parts of the hardware store, right? Heck of a lot easier than a 3D printed gun. And just as lethal. In fact, probably more lethal because it actually has a higher capacity, higher caliber. Okay? Now, why am I showing you this video with these geniuses holding up their smoky shell? Because what they did was perfectly legal, at least in most states. California may be a different story, but in most states they did. Everything's legal in New Jersey, as they say, right? What they did, nothing's legal in Jersey. Everything's illegal in New Jersey. What they did not violate federal law, right? Right. So what does the law actually say? Well, we have our good friends, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and their position has long been that if you sell a gun, you must register it, right? If you put a gun into commerce, you must register it. You must go through background checks and so on. But if you make a gun for yourself, nothing, right? You can't make, for example, short-barreled shotgun. You can't make what's called a machine gun, automatic weapon. There are a few narrow exceptions, but for the most part, small arms, rifles, handguns that you make yourself are legal. There's efforts to change it now. Maybe I'll talk about that a little bit later. But under established law, this is legal. So then what's the problem, right? How did the governments go after 3D printed guns? They did not actually go after the manufacturing of the guns. No. They chose a very different and curious path. Instead, they went after the software, the files that could be used to make the gun. Both the State Department, as well as several states, New Jersey and California in the lead, have said that sharing the files used to make these weapons is a crime. Sharing information is a crime. That's where the First Amendment comes in, right? The First Amendment, I'm sure you'll take an entire course on that topic, generally says the government cannot censor your speech. They cannot impose a prior restraint of speech in advance, right? They might punish you after the fact what you said, but they can't stop you from distributing your speech in advance. All right, so the argument goes, well, wait a minute, if we're sharing this information, how can you stop us from doing so? They say, well, your information is really dangerous, right? You're giving people instructions to make weapons. Can't that be banned? Can't you stop people from sharing dangerous information? Well, you may have heard of the Anarchist Cookbook. Anyone ever heard of this book? Yes? So this was very popular in the 60s and 70s. It was basically a terrorist hand guide, right? How to make explosives, how to make bombs, how to make poisons, right? How to do bad stuff. And there were efforts to keep this book off the shelves for many years. You might say, wait a minute, okay, fine, I'm with you. A book, right? A book is speech. We're not going to argue that one. But this is code. Well, look, the precedent here is sort of uneven. But information is speech. It's just a different way of communicating, right? Zeros and ones are just like letters. And the Supreme Court has held that the creation and dissemination of information are speech, right? We live in a world where code is everywhere. And to the extent that people are designing this, they're building these models, it's not much different than canvas on a paper, a paint on a canvas. There's also the Second Amendment, and this is now sort of a more exciting topic. I've been giving this talk for years, and for years I would say, well, the Second Amendment, well, the Supreme Court might get around to it whenever. They've gotten around to it, so we can talk about this now. More than a decade ago, the Supreme Court decided that the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear arms. This is a right that's individual. And the landmark case was DC versus Heller, holding that the Second Amendment guarantees individual right. 2 years later, the court decided McDonald v. State of Chicago, that's O.S. McDonald, and there the court held that the Second Amendment was incorporated. That is, it restricts both the federal government and the state government as well. But in the wake of Heller McDonald, the court went nearly a decade saying nothing at all about the Second Amendment until this past term. We get the case of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, B-R-U-E-N, Bruin. This was a huge case where the court held the Second Amendment extends outside the home, that you have a constitutional right to carry a gun in public. But the court did more than that. The court said that if you want to justify a modern gun control regulation, you have to show history. You have to show, is there some analogous provision in the law from the past that supports this modern day regime? So, for example, was there any instance in history where the government said, if you want to have a gun, you have to satisfy some good cause standard, right? They have to show why you need that weapon. The answer was no, that was never the standard. So the New York law was declared unconstitutional. So going forward, the courts are asking with the Second Amendment, is there some old law, some historical analog, if you will, that supports what you're doing here? So I think there's two lines of precedent we have to think about, which is a right to acquire arms. For much of world history, there was no restriction on getting arms, right? You could generally buy a weapon. There's some blips here and there, but in our legal system, there were pretty broad access to weapons, only more of a 20th century invention. And to some extent, the 19th century was used to disarm the freed slaves, right? But generally, people were allowed to acquire a gun. Now, the Heller case said, we do not disturb long-standing prohibitions on the sale of firearms, right? And they never really justified that, and the Bruin case didn't disturb that. But there's at least some right to acquire arms. But there's another line of history that I actually feel quite confident about, which is the right to make arms. Right? Long before there were gun stores, right? Long before you could buy a weapon at Walmart, people had to make their own weapons. You go back to the American Revolution, people armed themselves, right? The Patriots made their own musket ball, right? The Patriots made their own rifles. And there's a very deep tradition of making your own weapons. In fact, to this day, you are able to make your own weapon like those idiots in the garage who fire their shotgun. And that's perfectly legal under federal law. So I think these precedents support a right to both make your firearm through a conventional means or a 3D printer. There's also what we call a hybrid right, which is sort of this weird chimera in constitutional law. We have a one right reinforces another. So, for example, if I say the government bans saying Merry Christmas, an actual warrant Christmas, right? You can't say Merry Christmas. Is that a free speech violation or a free exercise violation, or a little bit of both? Rights reinforce each other. So when you ban sharing information about how to make weapons, you have both a First Amendment problem and a Second Amendment problem that doesn't work. Okay? So next I want to talk a bit about the current state of the law. So since the 1980s, we've had on the books the Undetectable Firearms Act. This law says that any gun must have a certain quantity of metal, enough metal to trigger a magnetometer, a metal detector, right? And the origin of this law is actually not very thoughtful. It's basically the fear of the Glock handgun, right? The Glock became very popular in the 80s, and there was this perception this gun was made out of plastic. It's not true, of course, but people had this perception. And perhaps it was both crystallized by, oh, poor Bruce Willis, I feel bad. I made this slide a while ago. Now it's very sad. He's with us, but his mental stage is slipping. But anyway, one of the best movies of all time was Die Hard. And he has this one line which says, luggage, that punk pulled the Glock 7 on me. You know what that is? A porcelain gun made in Germany. It doesn't show up on your airport X-ray machines, and it costs more than what you make in a month. Every part of the sentence is false, right? There is no Glock 7. It's not made of porcelain, it's made out of metal. It's from Austria, not Germany, and it will show up in an airport X-ray machine. And they're quite affordable. So everything he said was false. But this created this sort of fear of this plastic gun. So we've had a ban on undetectable firearms for years. So how does the Liberator, the gun I mentioned, comply with the law? The designs say you must put a block of metal in the handle. The block of metal serves no purpose. other than to satisfy the law. We have to solder in that block metal, and that will comply with the law. Okay. So how then can we perhaps ban 3D printed guns? Well, this is Senator Schumer, who tries to ban everything, and he tried to ban these things unsuccessfully about a decade ago, and he hasn't really come back to it because he's trying to ban other things. One proposal that didn't go anywhere is a ban on materials. Let's ban plastic because then they can't 3D print guns. I swear, professors actually made this idea. It was actually a Georgia Tech professor, and I remember. He actually said we need to ban the plastic. You're not too far from here, right? We need to ban the plastics. They can't make plastic guns. Well, guess what, folks? You can 3D print metal, like Terminator style, right? You can actually 3D print a metal gun. Very expensive. This handgun costs about $40,000. Not a good use of your money. You can buy thousands of guns for that price, but you can do it. I swear, another professor said we need to ban gunpowder so people can't. Anyway, I'll just move on. But the primary approach to regulating 3D guns has been export control laws. Has anyone had any experience with export control laws, maybe internships or studies? Right. So this is a legal system that makes some sense, right? It really became important during the 60s and 70s, where there were restrictions about sending weapons to our enemies, the Soviets, right, and their allies. So if you wanted to send Stinger missiles to Afghanistan, you probably needed the government's permission first, right? If you want to send nuclear submarine codes to China, you probably need the government's permission first, right? This makes some basic sense. But historically, this was limited to actual arms, like a submarine or a missile or a guidance system. But in more recent years, the government has extended ITAR to code, to speech. And for example, this came up with cryptography, right? Algorithms that encrypt information were deemed exports. And if you wanted to send basically a CD-ROM information out of the country, you need the government's permission. And this was sort of a reversal. The DOJ has long said that we cannot use the ITAR to regulate speech in the public domain. It only extends to physical devices or speech that is sort of classified or controlled. But what happened in 2013, actually 10 years ago, next month, my goodness, it's been forever, the State Department sent a letter to Cody Wilson, who again became my client. And they said, we order you to take down these files that you're posting to the internet violate export control law. He posted the Liberator pistol, my favorite, the Dirty Diane. It's a silencer named after Diane Feinstein. He has a sense of humor. And he said, you must take down these files immediately. Okay, so that was 2013, 10 years ago. What's happened since then? A lot. In 2014, we sued the State Department. And we argued that this letter, this takedown order, was a prior restraint of speech, right? That ordering us to take down this file is a prior restraint of speech. We also made arguments based on the Second Amendment and also, your run-of-the-mill APA stuff that was beyond the scope of authority and so on. The trial court denied a preliminary injunction, finding that guns were bad, and the public safety basically demanded that the government could do this. The Fifth Circuit affirmed, and they said, well, we will not decide whether you'll succeed in the merits. We'll say basically in the public interest, you lose. Sensing a pattern, right? They try to avoid the legal question. They always saying, oh, guns are bad. And then we went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court denied certiorari. So then we went back down to the district court, and the district court said, can you guys engage in settlement? We said, okay. And by that time, we had a new administration. The Trump administration came into town, and we reached a settlement. Huzzah, right? And the settlement was we would get a license to publish this information online. So then we made, I think what might have been a mistake, is that we announced the settlement before it was final. That proved to be a mistake. So the chronology goes very quick. I'll just give the days of the week. The settlement was to go into effect on a Friday. Okay. On Monday, we were sued by a number of gun control groups who tried to block the settlement. Okay. So then I had to go down. I went to Austin, not too far from where I live, and had to argue a TRO on very short notice, basically 1 day's notice, saying, no, you cannot block a settlement. These people aren't parties to a settlement. They can't block it. They have no role. And the court agreed. He denied the settlement. So on Friday afternoon, we got our permit. And we put the files online, right? We didn't tell anyone. We sort of just did it quietly. People started downloading. We didn't make an announcement about it. But I had an inclination, okay, this is really bad. They're not done yet. They're not going to stop. Because we had noticed that the New Jersey Attorney General had participated in the call. They were there. It's like, we're getting sued. So let's go on offense. Let's sue all these AGs. Let's sue New Jersey and California, get the entire bunch of them, sue them all in Texas, and saying, get out of our way. So the plan was to sue them all Monday morning. So what happened? Sunday afternoon, I get a phone call. It's the Pennsylvania Attorney General. He just sued us in federal court on a Sunday afternoon, seeking a TRO to block us from sharing the information. I said, we already did. It's like, what? They didn't even know. I said, we've been sharing this information for the last 2 days. He's like, he already filed the complaint. So this is a good lesson in lawyering. They filed a TRO on Sunday. The judge called a hearing for Sunday afternoon. That afternoon, I was in New York. I was at LaGuardia Airport, where I'm sure many of you have actually been. I did a TRO hearing in an airport lounge because that's where I was, and that's when the judge is getting the phone. You get in the damn phone. You don't protest him or make obscene signs against him, right? We don't do that. So I argued the case. And look, judge, the files are online, but here's what we'll do. We can limit IP addresses, right? We will block any Pennsylvania IP address from accessing the files. Will that be good enough for you? Like, yes. All right, that worked. That had never been done before, right? This is like North Korea level filtering, right? Usually you don't limit IP addresses by state because it's never a thing that things are illegal on the internet in different states. But we did that. We weren't done. The next day, we got sued again by the New Jersey Attorney General and the Washington Attorney General in Seattle. Now, the Washington case was not just against us, it was against the State Department as well. And there were like 20 states that joined that case. So actually, New Jersey sued us twice in 2 different courts on the same day. Go figure. It's a Jersey thing you wouldn't understand. So the first one, the Jersey case, was actually filed, I swear to you, in New Jersey Chancery Court in Newark. Right, Chancery Court. They sought an injunction, basically a nationwide injunction against a Texas company to stop sharing information. This is where you go if you're a nuisance, like if your neighbor's playing music too loud, you go to Chancery Court, right? It was insane. And I told the judge, like, Judge, Your Honor, with respect, I don't think you have jurisdiction to issue a nationwide injunction against a Texas company. He's like, I think you're right, Mr. Blackman. But I said, tell you what, we will block New Jersey IP addresses as well. Leave us alone. They denied the injunction. So now we're basically building what I call the blue wall. We're basically building a wall around all the blue states so they couldn't access our files. And they actually had a New Jersey detective saying, I went to Manhattan with my cell phone. I downloaded it there. And see, I evaded your filter. And I was like, okay, whatever. But denied the injunction. But then we get to the last hearing. This one was in Seattle. And this was the worst one of all because we were being sued by 20 states. And I go up there and make my hearing saying, Judge, First Amendment, Pentagon Papers case, freedom of speech, et cetera, et cetera. And the judge asked me only one question. What was the question he asked me? Mr. Blackman, do you represent all the parties? That was the only question. Why? He wanted to make sure his injunction would stick against me, that all the parties had an opportunity to be heard. And in candor, I hadn't talked to my clients, right? There were some clients I couldn't get a hold of. As I was like, yes, Your Honor, just that's the best I could do. I think I got them all, but anyway. So I do this hearing. At the end, the judge rules on the bench. I'm issuing an order, a nationwide injunction against the State Department. So I asked him, I was like, Your Honor, are you issuing an order against my client to take down the files? He says, no, I am not. I said, so just to be clear, you're ruling that the State Department must revoke our license. And if we don't have a license, we can't publish the files. Like, yes, that's correct. And then he makes a sort of a, snide comment saying, if your client doesn't want to comply with the law, that's his problem. Which was kind of harsh. And he said, anarchists, don't always comply with the law. My client's an anarchist. And I said, Your Honor, my client complies with all court orders. I don't appreciate that. And he kind of just, he muscled back, and that was kind of annoying. But then we had the order in hand. I had to call my client. I called Cody. That's going to suck. You'll have to tell a client you lost in court. Big case. It's been a roller coaster. I think I billed 90 hours in 4 or 5 days. It was a crazy week, right? And I told Cody, take down the file. It's like, I can't. he had built so many firewalls and redundancies against hackers, it was almost impossible to take. It took almost 3 hours to take down the files. He had to basically take one layer part at a time, the various securities he built up. And finally, he took it down. I took a deep breath, and the day was over. Actually, it wasn't over yet, though. So Governor Cuomo, you might remember him from New York, right? Yeah, wait, right? There's some New Yorkers in that room. So then at the end of the day, I was exhausted. I was just dead tired. I've been working nonstop. My phone rings and it's an unlisted number. Like, oh great, who's this? So I pick up and he's like, "This is Governor Cuomo from New York." I'm like, okay. Um, and he says, "You tell your guy to take those files off the internet." I was like, "You idiot!" I said, "Your attorney general just sued me and got an injunction against me. You've already won against me. What do you want me to do?" He's like, "Well, I'm giving you the order, not her." See, it's funny. He wanted to take the credit for it. He didn't want his AG to take the credit for it because in New York, the AG is separate. He's like, the AG doesn't work for me, right? I'm independent, so I'm giving you this demand. And I said to him, like, okay, how about this? Have your lawyer send me a letter, which never actually happened, right? They started blustering and just going on and on and on. And eventually we started talking. He's like, yeah, so where are you from? I'm like, yeah, I'm from Staten Island. He's like, you're from New York? What are you doing in Texas? I'm like, well, I like it in Texas. He's like, oh, you gotta come back to New York. It's like, no way, I'm not coming back to New York. No way. I left for a reason. And then I said, my parents are still in New York. He's like, oh, they are. And then he said, wait for this. So who are they voting for? So then he started pitching me about why they should vote for him. I'm like, okay, my parents are Democrats. He's like, good, good, good. And then the best part was, it was actually my parents' anniversary. I said, today's my parents' anniversary. And he said, tell them Governor Cuomo wishes them a happy anniversary. I was like, okay, well. And I called my parents. I told them. That was, the end of a roller coaster ride. We're still not done. This case is still ongoing. After all this litigation, we were litigating in the Third Circuit, in the Ninth Circuit, in the Fifth Circuit, and we're still there, right? Litigation sucks. You think it goes quickly, it doesn't. We're in this sort of torturous path, right? Here's what happens. We had sued New Jersey in the district court in Austin. The district court transferred the case to New Jersey. The Fifth Circuit reversed, saying, no, the case belongs in Texas. The judge in New Jersey refused to return the case. I don't think this ever happened before. We've looked. This has never happened before, where a circuit court said, please return the case back to Texas. And the New Jersey district court said no. The district court judge basically disagreed with the Fifth Circuit and said, nope, not doing it. So we're in this weird purgatory where we can't go anywhere because we're stuck. And eventually, actually, that Fifth Circuit, the district judge in New Jersey reassigned the case to someone else. Maybe we'll get a different ruling. This motion is pending. But we haven't even gotten to the Third Circuit. So we're now literally 10 years away from when the first letter was sent out. And we still don't have a ruling on the merits. Still after 10 years, but whether the First Amendment protects a right to share these files. I'm working pro bono at this point, so it's all cool. But litigation takes forever. And when it involves guns, things sort of drag on indefinitely. All right. That's my spiel. I thank you so much for your attention. I welcome your question. Thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that there is like no restraints on the speech for the First Amendment government cannot restraints, but wasn't there certain instances that there was? Like I know usually people say you cannot yell fire in the theater, but you can actually. But there are other restraints like fighting words and other stuff.
Right. Right. So there are very narrowly constrained exceptions to the First Amendment, one of which is the fighting words doctrine. I'm not sure how much vitality that has. The court hasn't really relied on that in many years. The example is you can't falsely shout fire in a crowded theater, and that's not the law either. That was overruled in the 1960s in Brandenburg, Ohio. So there actually are very few categories that are exempt. There is a category of what's called crime facilitating speech, right? Where if I write on a piece of paper, here are step-by-step instructions how to assassinate the president, right? I think the government can probably prohibit you from writing that on a piece of paper, right? It facilitates crime. But here, the files are being used to create guns that are themselves lawful, right? And so the crime facilitating speech argument doesn't always work. It gets trickier on the state level because New Jersey bans everything because everything's illegal in New Jersey. But still then, you still have the issue of can a single state ban information on the internet nationwide? And you may like the restrictions on guns, but imagine that Alabama bans sharing instructions how to make sex toys on the internet. And it's very hard to limit stuff to state by state IP addresses, right? We use that example in a brief. We actually, if Saudi Arabia banned sex toys on the internet, the United States banned them as well. Um, so with the internet, it's a little bit trickier. Now, I think probably New Jersey could ban the end product as having a gun without a serial number. They can do that. But I don't think they can ban the preliminary step of sharing the information to get there. Does that answer your question? Thank you. Yes.
Well, the judicial argument that guns have been made by people and the continuation of bow and arrow and the sword, foreign hesitant trading along guns. How is that been perceived in the United States as a form of argument? Has it not been?
I'll tell you, again, I've been litigating this case for nearly 9 years. We've not had a ruling on the Second Amendment issue, and if it has, been very perfunctory. And hopefully, after the Bruin decision from last year, we'll get another shake at that argument. But we've really been leading our foot with the First Amendment. That's really where most of the juice is, right? Because we haven't really asserted strongly a right to print the guns, right? Because actually creating the objects triggers other issues, no pun intended, right? But the primary issue is, can you prohibit sharing the information? As a reality, as a practical matter, most people never actually print these things. It's actually very hard. 3D printing is not point, click, shoot. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's planning, there's decisions, different types of materials you use. You have to treat the barrel with this acetone bath, doesn't blow up in your hand. There's a lot of things you have to do. So people just download the files just as a political statement. It's mostly political more than any actual weapon. Good question. What else? Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned the Pentagon Papers, and it does sound like it implicates prior restraint, where if this information's already out there,
Mm-hmm.
how can the government uh, then say, we're gonna take this down? It's already
I mean
published.
that's been one of our recurring arguments, right? The information's been out there for years, and even if you take our site down, it's available elsewhere. So the public interest cannot possibly favor a preliminary injunction on the cannot deny us a preliminary injunction. Um, I think the judge in Seattle said, oh, he said if you're a cybernaut on the dark web, you can find these files hidden. No, give me a break. Google Liberator, you'll find it in 5 seconds. This is not hard. Go to any website, you'll find these files. So a lot of litigation is for, I don't want to say for principle's sake, but you're fighting over files that already exist. The government's fighting a losing battle. So I actually feel it's a worthwhile battle for us to fight against them, but they've already lost, right? Because the files are there. We share them. They're in the millions. They're everywhere. Yes, sir.
Uh, you just said the onus of your argument with a lot of juice with the person. Why is it not the second?
Courts really don't like the Second Amendment.
Say it again?
Courts really don't like the Second Amendment. Even after Bruin, they really don't like it. Judges who have private security details and high fences around their place of employment don't have the same concerns about the guns as people who don't have those sort of accoutrements. Again, most judges are not the type of people who go shooting, and they didn't grow up around guns, and they grew up at Harvard and Yale and Princeton where they don't need guns. So I think in general judges don't like guns. Bruin, what we're seeing now with Bruin, I think lower court judges will resist the decision. They're going to try and read it as narrowly as humanly possible because again, they don't like guns. So it makes more sense to leave off with the First Amendment, where you at least have some support on the left for free speech rights. Hopefully, we get some juice there. But it's been slow going. I mean, you always see on we watch TV, Law and Order, in a single hour episode, an entire case from start to finish, and that's great. But in reality, we've been on this for a decade, and we're still working on it. I've lost count of how many briefs we filed. I don't even know anymore. Yeah.
Do you,
Just with the restrictions on like blatant access on the internet, that I just throw like having a commerce clause undue burden, like layers go up in my head.
With the state restriction, you mean?
Yeah, for the state.
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, no, we've raised a dormant commerce clause challenge. No courts actually ever ruled on it because, of course, right? I think the idea that a single state can prohibit a file from being on the internet is too much. Now, what New Jersey argues is all we're saying is you can't download the files in New Jersey, right? But as a realistic matter, there's no perfect way of preventing that from happening. You have a VPN, you have tunneling, you have different tools used to allow those sorts of downloads. So really, as a realistic matter, what we've had to do is have this fairly elaborate online background check where if you put a credit card and different ways we can sort of verify identity, we've gotten it pretty good where a blue wall keeps out people from New Jersey. But again, they had one guy said, oh, he had a summer home in Pennsylvania, so he was able to get it, something like this, right? But it's the best we can do under the circumstances.
Now, why after Bruin, after this influx of this top-down view of, hey, guns aren't the issue, why courts still stingy about guns the way they should be?
Well, look, where in New York are you from?
Sure.
I'm from Staten Island. How many New Yorkers we have here? Is everyone here from New York? Where are you from? Westchester. That's not really New York. No, just kidding. Oh, is that in Connecticut? No, okay. I was told to get out. We don't want you here.
I'm not going there.
Never, never, never. I think if I go to Newark, they'll flag my passport. Oh, okay, very good. Well, we're basically a bunch of New Yorkers here, right? So, actually, I'll be in NYU next week. I won't even detain me. Um, Right. So I mean, look, again, as a general matter, people who became federal judges in the past are not the kind of people who use guns, right? They had hostility to them. They went to elite institutions, even if they're from the South or from wherever. They went to elite institutions, and they have security details. And you thought, why people need guns? Guns are dangerous. They're icky, right? Bruin will change none of that. They'll just find different ways of resisting it, and they'll read it narrowly. Same way, I think the courts look. We're gonna have an affirmative action decision in a few weeks or a few months, right? Where a lot of what all law schools do, this one too, is practically declared illegal. And I think you'll have judges and schools try to resist the decision and read it as narrowly as possible. And unless the Supreme Court actually has some backbone, they're going to have to take steps to enforce.
Remember when you were showing me the pipe shopping? That, like, when they're trying to say, oh, let's ban the plastic, and we're gonna try to ban the metal, right? Trying to, like, put an age identifier on a 79, like how they do. We can't get any, can't get the ban mail. Is there anything that would be able to protect against that type of more search and petty search material ban protection?
No, I'll be honest. What I actually thought would happen and never happened was actually intellectual property. I used to have a slide on this. I took it out because it never went anywhere. but you could 3D print designer goods, right? So imagine you could 3D print a pair of Air Jordan sneakers, right? That might retail for $500, and you can print them for $5 materials, or you can 3D print, a Louis Vuitton bag or something, right? And it looks exactly the same as what you would have in the store. I thought that the designer brands would actually be very afraid of IP and 3D printing, and they would actually try and restrict what you could print. So imagine a printer had a filter chip in it, where if you tried to print a designer good, it would say you can't print this. For example, if you take a high quality scanner, you try and scan US currency, it will not work. You know this? All US currency has a little code in there. And if you use a Canon or Sharp, whatever print scanner, it actually detects it and will say, we will not make a copy of this. And that's built in through Secret Service, right? It's actually built right into your device. So I thought that 3D printers would have a similar a filter that you couldn't 3D print a gun. And that it never took hold. I'm not sure why. I thought that'd be the most logical choice. Put pressure on these companies, which are mostly liberal, to put filters in their devices so you can't print these items. Uh, One of the arguments we actually raised is people do LARPing, right? People who do this live action role playing, who make mock guns for Comic Con, would not be able to make their devices. People make these fake guns. They're not real, but they look exactly the same. But that argument never really went anywhere. It just sort of died. I think people have sort of forgotten about this topic because there's other issues, but it comes up every now and then. What else? All my New Yorkers. Yeah, my fellow Staten Island friend from Huguenot.
So I'm like curious. You mentioned like the hybrid rights theory,
Mhm.
and I just wonder how effective you think that is as like a theory to argue for it.
Not
I
much.
it's not very.
You
brought up. It's just sort of the dicta that was mentioned by Philia.
It's Smith, yeah.
I think honestly it would be pretty good argument because you have multiple rights showing up as a question. You think would heighten the interest of the
Right.
court to provide an answer for whatever that issue is, and given here First Amendment, Second Amendment. But I almost think that when there's a hybrid rights theory, it's almost more effective to just stick to one of the amendments and make the argument.
Yeah.
The reason the court just never wants to revisit hybrid rights. What made me think of hybrid rights was, Cuomo 2.0, made an argument after like the Buffalo shooting that she wants the police like
Oh, Hochul's Como 2.0, is that what you call her?
yeah. He just wants to use like this hate rhetoric and like violent rhetoric on the internet, kind of vague hate speech, kind of laws, I guess, that she's looking to create. And to me, that could potentially be like a hybrid rights argument, but I think that would essentially go
Yeah.
nowhere in the court. So it almost would be, unfortunately, it's more effective to just stick to a First Amendment argument on the table.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, I think what we're seeing now is sort of a reverse in the right and the left. Let me just sort of answer your question sort of meta, right? For many decades, it was progressives, liberals who favored broad free speech rights because they were out of power and they needed their minority views protected. So the people shutting down college campuses were progressives saying, we need free speech, we need free speech. And I think now it's sort of the opposite, where the people demanding free speech are the right wing nutjobs like me, right? Because the institutions don't favor our speech. Look what happened at Stanford last week, where you have a federal judge being shouted down for having the temerity to come to Palo Alto.
We don't have that here.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful. No one shot at me. No one. Wish there were more people here, right? That'd be nice. There's some signs in the back, but it's good. Um, I've been protested before. It's okay. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. No, it's true. I've been heckled. It's okay. But what we're seeing in New York now is the idea that, okay, we have power now and we're going to restrict speech because we don't like what you're saying. It's almost a reversal of what it was decades ago. As for the hybrid rights argument, yeah, this came from Justice Scalia and Smith. That decision is not particularly popular right now. There's movement to try to overrule every 5 minutes. Maybe not, maybe yes. I don't think it's going anywhere. Good questions. Hochul 2.0, Cuomo 2.0. I've not heard that one. Yes.
I think I know a reason as to why you can't just ban 3D printing guns specifically, because let's just say you do ban the file, you can always change the file name, or you can just separate the actual 3D file into independent 3D
Of
files.
course.
It's just like
Unenforceable. It's completely unenforceable. So we actually had this one argument in our brief. If you take New Jersey statute seriously, it would ban you from printing a screw.
Yeah.
Because a screw can be used in a gun.
Or cylinders.
Anything, basically anything you could 3D print that could be used in a gun would be banned. The statute was so overbroad, if you learn overbreadth doctrine first round, it was so overbroad, it banned printing basically anything. And I was making arguments of overbreadth, and none of it mattered. It just whatever. Guns are bad. Yeah.
I guess a counter argument is that the government monitors or regulates if you buy a bunch of fertilizer, then that could be indicative of you making a bomb. And so, in the same way, the government is well, it's not it's not like a multiplicative effect. It's one gun that you print. So, what is the argument that these states are making that
Well, they argue that if they can ban the end product, they can ban the code used to make that end product. In other words, if they can ban New Jersey, all guns must be registered and serialized. 3D printed guns are not serialized; they can't be registered. So they say if we can ban the end product, we can also use the ban the means to obtain that end product, the gun. That's their argument. Yes, sir.
Let's say that I was the president of Glock, right? And I wanted to release the specifications for the Glock knife, including down to the millimeter, down to the metal used in each particular part, right? Um, and let everyone know, including my competitors, for whatever reason, it's a stupid decision, but let everyone know exactly how the Glock 19 is made. Would the reasoning behind banning this the information on how to create 3D printed guns, would that reasoning also apply to this?
Well, are you saying release it on a book form or electronic form?
Electronic form.
Right. So even before 3D printed guns, there have long been schematics for guns online. So I'll give you an example. If you're an Olympic sharpshooter, right, you have to tune your rifle very precisely. And they actually share different ways of rifling, different ways to adjust the scope and so on. And that's been done forever. What sort of changed here was it's not just the electronic design, but you could easily implement that as a way to print it. And that's actually what sort of triggered this reaction. I don't see a difference in kind or scope, but that's how New Jersey and other states have defended it.
So it's the ease of that recreation.
Which they exaggerate. They say, oh, you just point, click, shoot. And it's not. It actually takes a substantial amount of work to do this, and you have to treat the chemicals. It's just a lot of work involved, but yes.
complicate a lot of the court's commerce clause jurisprudence on why several of these issues are arising, because considering how broadly they read their commerce regulatory power, which basically is we can regulate whatever we feel like it, whether it's not interstate commerce. I mean, Wicker v. Coburn was basically like, it doesn't need to be interstate, it doesn't need to be commerce, we'll regulate it anyway. Given that standard, you could basically regulate anything that otherwise would really not be touched by the federal government. And at least, like, say, if you have a state like New York, at least the other states can avoid the terrible regulations that New York is imposing. But when you're getting terrible jurisprudence from the court on commerce power,
Right.
nobody can avoid it.
Right. So what's unique here is that Congress hasn't actually said a word about this. Right. Chuck Schumer tried to ban these guns and he failed. Right. He banned everything else. He couldn't ban this. Remember he banned Four Loko? Do you remember that? Or was that before your time? I mean, why not ban everything? But what's unique here is Congress hasn't banned this. We've actually argued that Congress passed a statute about exporting arms, which, okay, I think is a good idea, and they've extended that through the executive action to files. And we argue that the agencies, State Department, is not acting within the scope of the statute. We argue to the contrary that were the federal government to in fact regulate this with such strong First Amendment issues, we should presume they've not regulated it, right? You can avoid those constitutional questions. And that's one of the arguments we've made consistently for years. Yes.
I don't know how you can do this, but or can possibly do this. Why not change the definition of what you're trying to make here? Try to turn it from, because having something labeled as a gun, you get all these laws and all these issues that can if you just treat it as something else. Why don't you try to treat it as something else, like a new form of life rather than gun? Or is that even possible?
I don't understand your question. I'm sorry.
Instead of doing it under the guise of, hey, this is a gun, why can't you just say, hey, this is a tool? Or hey,
Tool used to shoot bullets. I mean, I'm not sure how far that goes.
that's what I was just trying to say.
I don't think the New Jersey statute is phrased broadly enough. I don't think it would matter what we call it. Fire gun. All right, maybe one more question, then we'll wrap up. We're almost at 1:15.
All right, well.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate the questions. Thank you.